It has been such a great collaboration to be a part of the Writers and Books community for the past couple of years. And I was just telling Dan before folks entered that I'm really amazed at the amount of online programming that Writers and Books has put forth since Shelter in Place. So such a great bookstore, such a great writing community, and I'm really honored to be asked to be here tonight. Thank you to everyone who came out for poetry on a Friday night or Friday afternoon if you're here in California with me. It's wonderful to think about your square faces, even if I can't see them. So I've been doing this practice on tour that I'll likely do indefinitely, which is to read, to start off a reading with a poem by a poet of color whose work I owe a great debt. So I'm going to start off this reading with a poem by County Cullen called To the Swimmer. Now as I watch you, strong of arm and endurance, battling and struggling with the waves that rush against you, ever with invincible strength returning into my heart, grown each day more tranquil and peaceful, comes a fierce longing of mind and soul that will not be appeased until, like you, I breast yon deep and boundless expanse of blue. With an outward stroke of power intense, your mighty arm goes forth, cleaving its way through waters that rise and roll, ever a ceaseless vigil keeping over the treasures beneath. My heart goes out to you of dauntless courage and spirit indomitable. And though my lips would speak, my spirit forbids me to ask, is your heart as true as your arm? So I thought I would read mostly read from Via Negativa tonight, which came out last month. And then I thought I would end the reading by just reading a couple of poems from a new manuscript that I'm working on that I feel really excited about and actually feel like is pretty ripe fodder for quarantine times, shelter in place. So Via Negativa, for those of you who aren't familiar with this concept, is the process of describing something by describing what it is not. And it's often used to talk about divinity and God, but in this collection, I use it to talk about subjects with the same, I think, amount of largesse, which is desire, wanting, and also the writing of poetry, and in this case, Ars Poetica, or Poetic Manifesto. So if you read the book, you'll see that there are a fair number of poems in the collection that are called Via Negativa, a fair number that are called Ars Poetica, and just a few in there called Love Poem. So I'll start with the first poem in the collection, which is called Via Negativa. Darling, here's an Ars Poetica. Translate this moan. Translate an ellipses-sized space as punctuation. Oh, but you're a good girl, wanting body language all big, all engorged, all surrendering. Are you close, angel? I can feel divinity like a mummy bag, like something less stupid than a chrysalis, something as genius as breathy quiet. I'm close, closer than all the angels in all the worlds and all the heavens too. I am as close as Uriel, Gabriel, Muriel Rukeyser, as close as the rock is to unrocking itself. I am as close as anything until I am not a thing. I tramp to the kitchen in my birthday body, open the vault of the refrigerator, rest my head on the cool rationale of a cantaloupe. How to ride a bicycle. Letty, like a bright road, sits as a catcher does, her kilometers of hair prophetic. The day is a perfect one. Shutters of houses open like the eyes of children. You have worn your bravest sweater. You've lived here all your life. Did you love Letty once as a destination or a road that winds around an island with no place to end except the ride itself? Some unnatural thing tipped you down to the lobby of her body. You've long left your bicycle on the boulevard where everything must go to become gone. Now the cumbia overjoys the radio, a refrain of seared upholstery where she doused herself in hell, where she taught herself perdition. Please focus on my face, the aging photo of the day we taught you well, steadiness on two terrific wheels. I wish you would look at the bicycle, the brave sky blue bicycle. Via Negativa. Broken like a double yolk in a skillet, I have found vision, O Lord. I, your weary chef coming off the graveyard shift, the diner neon and palpitating. Plastic flowers in their vinyl booths bring to me the most acute sense of jealousy, jaundiced eye, and I am paralyzed by my own flesh failings. They'll never perish, but move from bakelite vase to sodden gravesite. How arduous and changing is bereavement, I cannot know. I'm reading this next poem for my friend Natalie, who I confessed all of my love of big lumber narratives to once, and then she laughed at me because there's a poem in here about one such lumber narrative by the same name, which is Ken Kesey's Sometimes a Great Notion. They felt fires, tossed aspens like dead linebackers, into the shed, over the trapped animals and gusts of dust. Or they fell lovingly among the pint glasses, one by one. Hale men going under. One pushed another into a chipper, and no ambulance would drive them away. Or they were felled by townsfolk, who hectored, who watched them age. So down and down they went to drink, or to cleave woods so bright a film would be overexposed, and not a soul could write it down. Sometimes, surveying the clear cutting of a glade, dangerous as a cheek, I think, what men? A long boundary, from mute babes to frozen finches, whose notes are drowned in their granddaddy's still. What they'd be were they not duplicitous, half-starved, and raised. A room with a view, lovely in the evenings, when the sun hides her best parts behind a feathered fan, and we are going to the picture show. Now and then, a proud truck kicks grit into the air like a meteor, and we will never change. Here's a poem that was actually almost the title of this book. It's called You Animal. A grand applause, the whoosh of our exits, red rose bloodlets on the gurney, and now we present ourselves to the world. How beautiful, beautiful, how wrinkled, how old, how like death we are on our first birthday. A blue-masked man, likely, snipping the feeding tube, inciting ire. Who knows the story of our birth better than we do, in moments of adult unconsciousness, years down the liver-spotted road? Sometimes while eating an exquisite meal, sometimes while getting fucked hard, or in the moments of falling deeply asleep, losing all ability to move, something bolded. This is what being born is, and it is as surely felt as the sudden stillness of equinox. The intersection where one body empties and one manifests. A friend shows me the photos she has taken of her pets after their little resonant deaths. Somatic release, she says. The snake upside down on a white marble, the finch locked and stalked in his feathered cerecloth. Her human fingers so warm and individual. Ritual aperture. We know, but do not know, the wildness of ourselves. It's easy to remember that we are animals in crisis or classroom, in poems, that milk-tumescent breasts can ache when a mewling, starving stranger needs, when we are wanted. Oh dear body, how can I quit you? Where am I inside you, but cocooned in my own womb, my own cord wrapped tightly around my neck? Last two I'm going to read from Via Negativa are pretty fun, light-filled poems. This one's called Electrical Fire at 3 a.m. as Mercury stations direct. And Mercury is stationing direct, so I feel like this is a timely poem for the astro nerds among us. It was too generous for gunshots, too casual for fireworks. Our house sparked once, then once twice, once twice. Fire, in this day and age. Livid until we understood, we rose from bed and put on pants, one leg, then the other. You called the fire chief. You were the first of us to put on a proper face, transition, private to public, while the heavens and sunspots took stock of us, shrugged, passed us over. A long time went by, everyone in their discarded clothes, jeans under pajamas, trading tales of worse than a telephone pole on fire, more gruesome by the minute, as if we weren't all just country kids who'd forgotten meteor showers. The dark like line breaks, the sound of night beneath the sound. I tell my fair share, look at you to corroborate, and you are gazing up at it. American literature. This has an epigraph from John Keats, which is, the silver lamp, the ravishment, the wonder, the darkness, loneliness, the fearful thunder. There's a billboard with Route 66's version of June Cleaver holding a pie underneath block letters, homemade pies, which is how dry towns get their jollies, I guess. We buy coffee in cups so thin the Joe becomes us, and we never regain our human shape. And I say to you, I wonder where they keep the half-bull man. And you shotgun back, I've spent my life asking that, like the sharpshooter you are. Who wouldn't want to be the son of a bull and a damned woman? We're all sons of bull, and damn, you've gone west to find everything, or me, and look at girls the way I look at girls, who are bad for me. Like a desert through slatternly windows. This is America, the big prick statuary and their old growth knowing. In the end, spoiler alert, we're both after the wrong bandit, the bank gets robbed, the two women who should be lovers but aren't arc their caddy like a rainbow into the lavish vaginal canal at the last moment. The whale gets away. Faulkner's pretend mother doesn't get the burial she deserves. We have to choose between Liz Taylor in a kerchief or James Dean with his shirt stuttered open, and we can't. That's the roadside attraction we've wanted. Sideshows of our Go West monsters, replete with Slim Jims, radio evangelism, acid reflux coffee cup in a big gulp, and a man off the interstate with a sun punch sign that says, anywhere. And I want to end with just reading a couple of poems from a new collection I'm working on called Moon Moon, which may or may not be the scientific name for a moon that circles around another moon, so a moon's moon. And it's a deconstruction of the epic from a speculative perspective of if we had decided to leave the Earth after all of this and go to the moon, but the moon is full, I don't know, another country got to it first, and so we go to the moon's moon. And then it doesn't work out and we have to come home again. So this is a manuscript that considers that journey. I'm just going to read the first two in the collection. Let us be done with this world, cried the man, and take it upon ourselves to go to the moon, having cast aside this big blue chance. And up they went to the moon, but it was full, having short-circuited with astonishing quickness. And so they went to the moon's moon, but found it full to brimming with creatures who refused to be vanquished, meaning the moons themselves. Earthling. You'd never guess it. Oh, good, a game. But here we are, many days without our bouncing blue ball, our terrestrial ball and chain, our baby planet. Not even a note as it slips from the rear view. Now a footnote in a book that were we on said earth, a man would walk door to door to sell as a collection. The history of aquamarine, abridged. But we are not earthlings any longer, with no taxonomical replacement in sight. Stars coronate the endless black, winging it, and here we are, the most select, the most tourist, the most inclined to shoot the earth for the moon's moon, to go nil, to bankrupt because it is the most American thing to do, though America was left behind. Only the home, the journey to and from. Let us not seek solace from the callousness of quietude, for it is what has exiled us. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll open it up to Q&A. I guess I'll start out. You have a number of poems called Ars Poetica or Via Negativa. You kind of mentioned Via Negativa is describing something by what it's not. I just wondered if you could talk a little more about those concepts and what you mean by them, especially Ars Poetica.
Sure. And I just taught a class at Writers and Books that dove into these concepts as well, from a modern ecstatic point of view, thinking about ecstatic poetry in this particular day and age. So Via Negativa has often been used in talking about liturgical texts, or I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, so that's a big church of Via Negativa. We can't say exactly what God is, but we can talk a lot about what God isn't, right? And it occurred to me when I was considering this concept that, well, gosh, isn't that exactly what we do with poetry? We have a lot of ideas of what poetry is not, but we don't actually have a concrete, thank goodness, we don't have a concrete, just, Cliff Notes. Here's what poetry is. And the same with human desire, especially if you're a person who has in any way a sort of aberrant desire or an identity that one might think of as aberrant. So from there, the intersections between those three ideas kind of unfolded themselves. And the repetition in the collection is meant to do what repetition does best, I think, which is totally annihilate to make room for new understandings of these concepts.
Thank you. So we have Rebecca H. asks, what is lumber narrative?
Great. So in this situation, I was talking mostly about, my friend Natalie and I were reading Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson for a class that we're in together. And there's this, if you haven't read Train Dreams, it deals with like a lot of American industry that we don't see a lot of stories about these days, including the railways, but in addition, the lumber industry. And I don't want to put Natalie on blast because she's here, but she had sort of conflicting feelings about that part of the book. And I said, oh no, I love stories of industry, especially in this country, because they're so boom bust, and the lumber industry is a great example of that. And I said, and in fact, I loved Sometimes a Great Notion. And then she got Via Negativa in the mail a few days later, and she was like, you weren't kidding, and sent me a picture of the poem Sometimes a Great Notion. So narratives about the lumber industry in this country specifically. Oh, you're muted, Dan.
Sorry. Pat Boomsma asks, says, thanks, July, beautiful. I noticed when you read your poems, you don't necessarily pause at line or stanza breaks. That makes me wonder about the differences between experiencing poetry by reading and by listening. What do you see as the difference between written and oral poetry?
Thanks, Pat. Hi. That's such a big question. I'll try to have a somewhat succinct answer. You're right that I didn't. And I think that's because we would be here a very long time if I did. But you're right that there's sort of an art to performing, and it is a different experience than going and sitting with a book and having kind of a private experience. This is more public, it's more interactive. Here I am in front of you, the person who wrote these things, with people who may or may not have read them, which is sort of a kind of modern situation, isn't it? I think that I approach the two as very different. There's a certain amount of construction and control that you can have when you're writing something, especially with poetry, although I would argue now it can be done in prose and we're always thinking about new forms. But white space and line breaks are meant to discuss breath and breathing and pause. But in Paul Fusel's book, Great War and Modern Memory, he talks a lot about the origins of rhyme and meter and how poets would write poems in rhyme and meter and then they would be read out loud and they would be almost incantatory. They would kind of bring a sort of physical response from the people listening. And I think that the way that we interpret that audio from an audio perspective is so different than the way that we cerebrally think about rhyme and meter. So I like to approach the two differently as two different experiences, but I think it's very personal. I think a lot of poets might disagree with me on that, and have pretty vehemently.
Natalie Ponte asks, how do you consider and inhabit the speakers when writing your poems?
Oh, so meaning, okay. So meaning, like when writing about a different perspective, or just speakers in general? Yes, okay. So it's interesting because there's this cliche, and I think it's not just a cliche in poetry, I think it's a cliche with anybody who writes books, that your first book is about your childhood. And then maybe you continue to write about your childhood or you continue to write about yourself, but you might not. And as much as I was like, that's not going to be me, that is absolutely what happened. My first book is completely about my childhood. And so there was not really a lot of question about speaker so much. But I found that the more that I learn about poetry and the more that I practice and the more that I study, the more interested I am in occupying other voices, or even omniscient voices, which is funny because I'm also writing fiction right now and I struggle the most with point of view. So I think I find when I figure out what a poem really is about, which is usually much, much later than I've actually written it, so after I've revised it many times and I figure out what it's about, then part of that revision process is, who is the best person to tell this story? Do I want an expansiveness, right? Like I have this chapbook that is called Quantifiable Data that's written from the perspective of a chorus of swans. It's really weird. And it seemed like having the ensemble anthropomorphic speaker in that situation was going to open the lens of this broad thing that I wanted to talk about. So I guess it's similar to writing short stories. It just happens in a way that is a bit different just because of form and white space.
And, Ren asks, how much outside reading and research do you do for your work, whether it is about poetry or astronomy or religion? or even now you are bringing in US history?
I do a lot of research. I felt so validated by being told in grad school by a mentor that if anybody ever complains about how many books you have, tell them that it's your job. I think that reading and researching is a way for me to try to work through what I'm trying to write about. I usually cast a very wide net and read lots and lots of books in many directions and then sort of winnow down. But I also think it's a really great procrastination tool because you can read forever. And in fact, Mary Karr, in her Poetry Foundation lecture with Stuart Dybek, says something to the effect in her very Mary Karr way, where she says, you know, you can research until the Lord dons a nightie, but if you don't get your ass in the seat, then you're not writing anything. And I realized I felt very, very called out by Mary Karr in that moment.
Allison asks, I love the humor in your poems. How do you decide when to use humor and for what purpose? Or does this approach just pop up organically? That is, the poem tells you.
Humor in my poetry is recent, and it's like I don't actually think Trailer Trash is very funny, even if I tried to make parts of it funny. I have found that humor has come to me with a lot of therapy because it's a kind of emotional processing that maybe once you get, I like to think that once you get to a certain place with something you're grappling with, then humor comes in those moments because you have a different or more robust understanding. A lot of the times that I'm finding humor in my work now is because I have developed a definite acceptance of my own self-consciousness while I'm writing. And I get so excited about language, and I get so excited about going down a particular thread. And at some point, I think maybe once I got older and more well-versed in my own voice, I thought, well, why not let readers see that? Because readers are probably also big word nerds. They might appreciate having some insight. Also, I'm the sort of person who tells jokes to myself all the time. And most of the time, the people who are with me have no choice but to listen to them and then roll their eyes. But I don't have to see your reactions to them. So I sort of have a captive audience.
All right. Do we have any other questions? You can type them in, or you can raise your hand and we can promote you to talk if you'd like. But if there really isn't anything else, then we'll conclude. I want to thank July for reading. This was wonderful. Again, our website is wab.org. Our next reading will be on July 30th. That's the poets Denise Abercrombie and Jonathan Anderson reading. So I'll put the link back up. You can buy July's book. Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you everyone so much for coming.